Welcome back, everyone. After a quite short break, I hope you all are feeling refreshed, and I hope you all grabbed a cup of coffee or some hot water or some iced tea, whatever you like, right? So I hope you all had that quick refresh. So before we begin, I think first of all, I would like to thank all our previous speakers. I think they all have done a marvelous job because they have shared such valuable insights and all were very inspiring. So let's give a huge round of applause to everyone through your emojis, please. That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you, team. Thank you so much. So now we shift gears into our evening session. And you all know me, myself, Anita Diraj, once again. I've been your host yesterday, so today again I'm back with some exciting line of speakers as well as some exciting event for today evening, right, as part of our sessions. So they say learning doesn't stop when one session ends. It grows with every new perspective we hear. Now, as we step into our evening sessions, we are excited to continue the journey with a distinguished speaker joining us virtually and globally. So let's welcome them with the same enthusiasm and curiosity that has made today so engaging. As we continue our learning journey this evening, it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Jenna Charlton, the mirror in the machine. Jenna is a software tester and developer advocate with over a decade of experience. She's passionate about risk-based testing, accessibility, and building strong testing communities. She's also a dedicated mentor known for coaching, encouraging, and championing the generation of testers. So, in today's session, The Mirror in the Machine, Jenna will explore how our own experiences, emotions, and observations can become some of our most powerful testing tools. And also, she will show us how human intuition and reflective thinking can uncover quality insights that automation alone may miss. And here's a fun glimpse beyond our professional life. When she's not hunting bugs, you will likely find her enjoying the energy of punk rock concerts or the excitement of professional wrestling alongside her husband, Bob. And she also loves to travel and proudly serves as a human caretaker. I have no doubt this is going to be an insightful and engaging session. So please join me extending a very warm virtual welcome to Jenna Charlton. A round of applause before I hand over to Jenna. Thank you all. Over to you, Jenna.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. So I know it's evening for all of you. It is early morning for me. So this is going to be an exciting adventure together. Also, I want to make sure that you can see my screen because I have never shared this way before. Hoping that it's good. Somebody give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Sweet. All right. So today we are going to be stepping through a kind of new idea that I've been having, calling it human experience testing, as opposed to thinking about what we usually think about, which is user experience testing. I want to go beyond that.
Sorry,
So just
sorry to disturb. Can you share the screen?
oh, is it
Everyone is
not
able
sharing?
to see the screen? No, right? I think it appeared.
No, it is
It appeared
constant.
and went off. Yeah.
Oh, it
It
appeared and
appeared
disappeared.
and went
Okay.
off.
All right, let's try this again.
Yeah, please.
Can we see it now?
Yeah,
Yes.
now we can see it. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So just for some behind the scenes, I'm leaving for London for another conference tonight. And I have a So I'm like half set up in my normal setup because I am packed up to leave. Now, if we can get the slides to move, that would be great. Oh no. Did it? Oh, we lost it again. Okay. Let's do this one more time. This feels appropriate to 7:30 in the morning. Last time, I promise it's working. All right, cool. We're just going to do it without notes. I can do that. If I can make it. All right. All right, PowerPoint, you and I are going to fight. I'm so sorry, folks. This is not the way I do things. All right, we're going to share this differently. So I won't be able to see all of you, and I apologize about that, but we are going to have to share it from one screen. Totally fine. Just means that I don't see your reaction.
Okay.
So save them for the
Jenna, you want my help? Can I share your slides?
Absolutely, that would be even better. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm so sorry, folks.
No
Trying to use
worries.
the travel monitor that I've never used this way before.
So let me share my screen and your slides, and then you can get started. Give me a second. Let me present.
Yeah. And by the way, I did test this, so I assumed it would still work. Okay, awesome. All right, so let's go to the next slide. I'm just going to give you all a quick background on me. You already heard my bio. Been in QA for probably over 15 years now. Developer advocate of BrowserStack. Manish is my peer. I think you saw him yesterday. I am a grad student. I was majoring in something called experience design. I changed my major to IO psychology. They're actually really closely related. You want to learn about those, let me know. I love pro wrestling. I love punk rock. I started playing this cool game called Lorcana. I'm a cat parent, you know, all the basic stuff. All right, let's go to the next one. So here's where all of this came from. I started grad school. I started learning about research design. And when we think about research, we think about just looking into something deeply. But it was more than that. I started learning about how we actually design real research to do studies on human behavior and human experiences. And as I was studying, I started learning about these different research methodologies. The first one that I learned about was this idea of ethnography. Ethnography is the study of kind of culture and people and sociological groups. And then I learned about this idea of autoethnography. And on autoethnography, we go a step further. So instead of being a researcher and looking at something, looking at a community, looking at behavior, looking at a sociological group from the outside, you use yourself as a research subject. And you become part of that group that you're researching. And as I looked at the methods that we use in the autoethnography, things like personal statements, transcripts of interactions, so where you actually record them and you go back and look for interesting information from them, with data classification and things like that. That's a whole nother conversation. But as I looked at these methods and I looked at what you gain from autoethnography, I had an epiphany. And I realized that autoethnography looks a lot like exploratory testing. And when I thought about that, and I decided to try applying this idea of making myself the research subject in exploratory testing, all of a sudden I was seeing things I hadn't seen before. And it doesn't mean that I changed the way I test. It means that I changed my thought processes while I test. You can go to the next slide for me. Thank you. So let's start with a little bit of terminology. I mentioned this idea of ethnography and autoethnography. Let's start with breaking down ethnography a little bit more. Ethnography is qualitative. When we say qualitative research, what we mean is that this is research that's looking at not how much of something, but the qualities of it. So how do you feel? What does it look like versus how many times something happens? We use this in the social sciences, and the idea of ethnography is that you are removed from the subject. So you are outside looking in. Think about this as going to a focus group and being the researcher in the focus group versus being the person being researched. Versus autoethnography, which is still qualitative, it's still in the social sciences, but the researcher is part of the subject. You are part of the subject group, or you are the entire subject group. Really interesting study I saw looked at a nurse who detailed a week of her life during COVID. So she shared what it was like to be a nurse during COVID, and she used that to look for the cues that say that nurses were getting burned out. She actually looked through her narratives of her experience and looked for cue information. It's just one way that we can use this technique. Let's go to the next one. So let's talk about qualitative and quantitative for a second. I mentioned that ethnography and autoethnography are qualitative. They answer the question of why. Why does this thing happen? In research, we always come up with a research question. So if this is qualitative research, we're going to ask, why does this thing happen? We're going to look for observations. We're going to use symbols, which I'm not going to get into, but it's an important thing to know. We're going to look for words in the narratives and transcripts of why this thing is happening. And we're looking to observe and interpret information versus quantitative, where we're looking to gather, how much or how many of something happens, and then numbers and statistical results. So versus like, how much does this happen? We're looking at why does this happen? And our goal here with quantitative research is to measure and test. I want you to keep these two terms in your mind because they're going to come back up later. Let's go to the next one. So as I thought about autoethnography, and I thought about how it kind of applies to exploratory testing, it brought me to this kind of human experience testing. It brought me to thinking about, what does it mean to experience our software? Oftentimes, we put ourselves in the shoes of our user. But when we think about autoethnography, we're now the user. And it changed my perspective in exploratory testing because I was no longer treating the user as a persona. I was treating myself as the persona. This is important because we tend to see something and say, boy, it feels like that would be tough for a user. Well, is it tough for a user? Or is it tough for you too? And that's important to keep in mind because we separate ourselves, but we are part of that subject group. So changing that mindset actually helps us become more aware of the things that could be challenging for a user that feel just wrong. They don't feel intuitive. They don't feel comfortable to use. They don't feel delightful when we use them. So human experience testing is kind of a new way to insert yourself in as the research subject. Next page. So when we think about this idea of human experience testing, our feelings, our experiences become the data. This also helps us to take qualitative data, that why does something happen, or how do I feel when something happens, makes it quantitative data. We can now track that over time. When we start to really develop ways to continue collecting this data and keep it over time, we move this hard to make the argument for feelings data into quantitative data that we can count. So we track trends over time. The morale of you and your whole team can become a metric, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And this also helps us to start to develop some shared visual and actual language vocabulary. You may be saying, that doesn't make any sense. How does this help us develop vocabulary? Well, as you use this kind of technique, you start to develop ways to communicate information that's always been qualitative. It's always been feelings-based. It's kind of squishy. It doesn't have firm edges to grab onto. But when we develop shared language around it, when we develop shared vocabulary around it, now you can look at a developer and say, this feels bad. and that developer knows what bad means. Because bad to me and bad to you might be different things. But in our team, we develop a language, we develop an understanding of what that shared language is. I talk about this in talks I do about risk as well, where you kind of develop this language. So it doesn't mean you develop like code volcano. It means that you grasp the same understanding of the same language. This goes beyond just testing, by the way. This is something that all teams need to really develop in general, because it helps teams work together better. And language doesn't have to just be words. This also can be a visual vocabulary. That would be things like using emojis or colors as scales. So that's part of a visual vocabulary. Let's go to the next one. So let's talk about the methods. I've talked about this idea of human experience testing. I've talked about this idea of applying autoethnography. But what really matters here is how do you actually do this? Because this is not a formalized technique like using some of the fundamental test design techniques like boundary value analysis or something like that. This is much more personal and self-created. But the methods that you use to track the information you're gathering, that then becomes something that's kind of a hard and fast. And by the way, this is all new stuff. This is stuff that I've been developing myself. So you may reach out to me on LinkedIn and say, you know, I tried doing sentiment tracking and it didn't work for me. I made this change. If you try and use these techniques and you find a success with it, or you find something that's not working with it, let me know. I haven't formalized any of this past this talk and an article I wrote, but I'd like to. So definitely, if you have feedback as you try this stuff, let me know. I want to hear what you think. So the three methods that I'm talking about today are this idea of sentiment tracking, which is a low to very low effort methodology. This is really simple. It doesn't take a lot of work on your part. Narrated testing sessions. This is a moderate amount of effort, and you do really have to be doing exploratory / human experience testing to use the testing session narration. But there's a moderate amount of effort here because it takes a little bit more work. And then journey mapping. This is a high effort but high reward methodology. But there is a lot of work that goes into this, and I would recommend this not be your day-to-day testing methodology. You use journey mapping maybe to test as a group in like a mob session, or to test something that you have gotten all of the base bugs out and now you're really looking for the experience of it. But it's a lot of work to do journey mapping, but you get a lot of value out of it. Let's go to the next slide. So let's start with narrated testing sessions. I've had a lot of people ask me, what do you mean narrated? Like, what do I do to do this? Well, narrated testing sessions, if you think out loud like I do, is literally just recording all of that thinking out loud. It's really simple. You're either going to use like Zoom or Loom or another, I think Snagit has a screen recorder. So you're going to screen record and you're going to use a mic and just talk to yourself while you test. So you might say something like, wait, what? Where did the button go? The button disappeared. So when you say that, there's an emotional friction state. And in this case, that's confusion, disorientation, frustration. And you want to record that. So you want to say, my button disappeared, I'm frustrated. Or my button disappeared, I'm confused. Or this link didn't take me where I expected to, I'm confused. Or it can be something much more complicated, like this price on this policy, based on the data that I fed into it, feels wrong. I can't prove it. I don't have the actuarial table, but it feels wrong. So saying this price is wrong, I think, the emotional friction state is that you think it's wrong, but you can't tell why. And then you need to give it some sort of implication. And you don't actually have to say this because it should be implied, but I like to use this like, this is what I say, this is the friction state, this is the implication. But I'm mainly doing that because I'm more formalizing this. So our implication here is that the system is breaking or the system is breaking down during a critical path. This might cause panic in a user. And you would want to think about like, not necessarily if I was the user, but how do I feel knowing that I can't check this out? Do I get frustrated? Do I get angry? Do I panic? And you may say, well, I mean, come on, this is low stakes stuff, but it isn't necessarily. What if you are, and I don't know if this translates to the rest of the world, but what if you are trying to buy concert tickets on Ticketmaster? And everybody in the world is trying to buy concert tickets on Ticketmaster for, I don't know, who's a big actor, like Taylor Swift. We'll use her because I think she's the one who always sells out. So I'm trying to buy Taylor Swift tickets. I'm trying to buy Beyonce tickets. I am testing for Ticketmaster and the button disappears. How do I feel? Well, if I'm the user, I'm panicked. I'm going, oh no, I finally made it to the front of the line. I can get tickets. I can't get tickets. Like, that is heartbreak, right? So we need to think about, like, what does it really mean when it breaks? And that's what these narration sessions are about, is really giving us that kind of human data that we don't collect otherwise. Let's go to the next one. Then we've got sentiment tracking. And I said, this is pretty low effort. This is really simple. But I think there's real value in sentiment tracking in a broader sense. So narration, journey mapping, we're looking at micro. When I say micro, we are looking at small amounts of data during a testing session. When it comes to sentiment tracking, we're more looking at the macro. So we can do this by session and just say, this is what I was testing, and probably put like the story number with it, or the JIRA ticket number. And then how did I feel? And what you're doing there when you say how you feel is just a very short blurb, couple of sentences at most, could be bullet points, but you're literally just tracking in a journal format. This was the session, this was what was being tested, and this is how it felt. Or we can do this daily. How did today feel? Short narrative for context. How did it feel? I would recommend, by the way, if you're going to use sentiment tracking, that you use some sort of standardization. I like faces for this, like the little emoji faces. So frowny face is bad. Maybe you go one step further than frowny face. Maybe you go to like really angry face, like that's the worst of the worst. And then maybe you have super smiley face as you're like, this was great. That gives some sort of context beyond just your narration. That's what allows us to turn that qualitative data into quantitative data, is that measurement that's taken a feeling or an experience and turned it into something that we can count. So I would definitely consider that visual vocabulary being developed with your team to use sentiment tracking. Some things to watch out for if you use sentiment tracking are objectivity and self-reflection. Here's why those are important. As we track this, especially if we're going to track this daily, we're looking at, how do the testers feel? What was it like today? My friend Jenny Bramble has argued that the most important data point that you can collect is morale. This is a way to collect that kind of data. Here's what I mean by morale is the most important thing. As long as the company culture is healthy, that's the caveat here, because if it's an unhealthy company and people are miserable, it's going to be very hard to separate how the software feels from how you feel about your job. So we are going to take this from the standpoint that culturally within the organization, things are good. So let's say that for the past week, my sentiment tracking has said that I don't feel good about the software. I've had a lot of negative days about my testing. I've gone back and I've thought about it objectively, and I've thought about what the week looked like. And I said, there was really nothing organizationally that was upsetting me. I didn't find out upsetting news. Everything's been fine. Nothing's really going wrong. But I still feel pretty negative about the software. Well, now we're going to look at our narratives. What do our narratives say? Oh, today's was testing login. It not using the remember me button felt frustrating. And every day I noted that this felt frustrating. Okay, so we know that morale is slipping. Morale slipping in this case tells us quality is dropping. This is a warning that something is going wrong in your processes and the quality level of your software before we pick it up in number of bugs. Because the testers are the first to experience this. We're the first ones to notice that something doesn't feel good. You rolled out a new UI, everybody's testing it, and everybody feels bad. Everybody says, ooh, I just don't like it. It just feels wrong. And it's not that I'm resistant to change. It's that it feels clunky to use. It feels uncomfortable to use. It's too busy. It's not busy enough. It's too light colored. It's not light colored enough. Like all of those things are things that you're going to think about and collect and then use to track your morale. This is an early warning that something's going wrong. But this is also going to give you the least amount of data. You're going to get the most amount of data from the next one we're going to talk about, which is journey mapping. So let's head to the next slide. So as I said, journey mapping, heaviest framework. There's the most to do here. Journey mapping comes straight from user experience. I'm not even changing things. This is literally how we do it in UX research. So this is a framework that's used. You may have experienced some of this at some point in your career. Maybe you sat down with a user experience designer and they did some of this with you. In journey mapping, we document all of the interactions between you and the software. Literally every micro interaction gets recorded. We can use this with other methods. I would definitely recommend if you're going to do journey mapping, just record it. Record while you're doing it. It's going to be a really long recording. You might want to trim it before you share it with anyone. But you're going to get both the way you respond and your actual auditory responses that way. But you definitely don't have to. You could just do journey mapping. I'm going to show you a little bit of what that looks like. If you can go to the next page. So this is a modification to your typical UX, your UX journey mapping framework. As you can see, I've used colors on this one. So we're going to start with that emotions section that are the different colors with the dotted line. Green, of course, being the best. This feels great. Red being really bad. I don't feel good. Looking at the top, we start with user actions. So here I added an item to the cart. Then I navigated to the cart. I ensured that the correct items are in the cart. Then I click the back button, get taken to the previous page with shoes listed. And then I go back to the cart icon and nothing is there. Everything's gone. By the way, this happens to me every time I shop on a specific website, which is why I use this one. So it clears my cart when I hit back. That feels bad, right? It doesn't feel good and it's frustrating. And in my case, it makes me really angry because it screws up the way I like to shop. So I've tracked every single one of these little micro interactions. I'm using a framework that we use in user experience that's think, feel, say, do. I think this thing. I feel this thing. This is what I say when I experience this thing. And this is what I do when I experience this thing. I didn't put do in this framework because, frankly, we don't get the option to do something. Our job is to test things. We don't get to walk away. So took do out because our reaction and what we actually do in reaction is not something we're going to be able to follow. However, I could say that if I was an actual user, I would walk away. That would be my do, is say, this is really frustrating, feel annoyed, frustrated, done with using it. And then do would be close it, walk away from it. There are other versions of this. At the end of this slide deck, I have another version of this template and a sentiment, 2 examples for sentiment tracking. So as long as the conference is sharing the slides, you'll have access to those and you can just download them from the slide deck. All right, next page. There's a last step after we do any of these types of, or any of these methods, and that's the debrief. Here's the interesting thing. The debrief is most important in sentiment tracking. So even though sentiment tracking is the lightest weight, the lightest lift, it's also the most critical for debrief. And that's because context matters. And the way we write something down may not match the way we talk about it because it can be hard to track sentiment in writing. Oftentimes we are dependent on the inflection and the way we speak. We are dependent on contextualizing, which we can do when we speak much better than we can do when we write, especially if we're trying to keep things short. So the debrief is where you bring a group together. I would recommend making this like the Triforce. You want kind of your multidiscipline team here to debrief together. So maybe we're going to bring together developer, QA, somebody from product, somebody from user experience, those kinds of folks. And we're going to talk about what results we got out of that testing session. But it's not going to be, oh, here's the bugs I found. It's going to be, here's my journey map. These were the points that were delightful. These were the points that were frustrating. These were the points that were bad, that didn't feel right. And we're going to step through that and say, while this works, it doesn't work in a way that feels good. It feels bad for me as a human, and I know it's going to feel bad for our users. Or we're going to take our sentiment journey, we're going to take our sentiment tracking, and we're going to say, okay, we've had 2 weeks, this whole sprint, we have tracked the sentiment of the team. And every day, everybody has felt just a little bit worse. I am worried that we have an impending quality issue. I'm worried that we're seeing quality start to degrade. And in a couple of days, we're going to start to see lots and lots of bugs roll in. Or we're going to release this and we're going to get really bad feedback. So we need to go through and start to maybe use a more formal method, like using one of the heavier lift methods, and figure out what it is that's causing this negative feeling to grow over time. And then finally, when we think about narration, you're probably not going to make them sit and listen to your whole session. Although I've handed people a recording of my session and said, go listen. I think you need to hear this whole thing. What more likely you're going to do, and AI is super helpful for this, is you're going to take all of those sessions, turn them into transcripts, because that's really easy to do as long as you record using a software that does transcripts. Zoom does, Loom does, those kinds of tools. And you're going to say, I went through and I had it pull out the trends. Because that's what AI is great for, right? Is helping us find that kind of stuff. I don't want it to replace the people. I want it to do the labor-intensive work that I don't like doing. So I've had AI find the trends in these narrations. And here's what we found. We found that every time I touch the cart, I don't feel good. Or I found that every time I go to log in and it didn't remember me, I got frustrated. So this debrief is the opportunity for everybody to come together and say, here's what we found, here's what matters. Next slide. So I got a little faster than I expected to. I apologize. But let's wrap this up. Let's put the pieces together. So what we're doing here is we are taking this quantitative data. We're taking this data, we're taking our qualitative data. We're taking this data that's all about feelings and emotions and experiences, and we're making it quantitative. We're making it something that we can measure over time. And we can say, okay, this is no longer just anecdotal. This is now trend. And we can take that trend and use it. Anecdotal data is great for, here's how I felt today. But it doesn't help us make smart choices. The only way we can make smart choices is when we can prove that what we're seeing is real. And that's why we take qualitative data and make it quantitative. Sentiment is important. Morale is important. Those feelings are why people use our software. Now, if you say, oh, I don't work on software that humans touch, everything I do is API. Okay, great. But there's still a certain amount of sentiment that comes from your fellow developers having to work with that software. You may just manage APIs, but somebody's on the other end coding against it. Is the code rough to work with? Is it held together with chewing gum and shoelaces? If it is, the sentiment on working with it isn't good. So there's still value there, regardless of who our user is, regardless of who our customer is. And I want you to think about these methodologies. Now, like I said, there is nothing here that's a formalized methodology. You're not going to find any of this in ISTQB. These are new ways to look at things, some new thoughts. So as you start to try these, feel free to make it your own. There is no official way to do things. Just make sure as you're kind of adjusting this to the way you work or to your teams, that you are keeping in mind that you're collecting the kind of data that will really drive things forward for you. Last slide, please. So I am open to taking your questions. Also, that QR code will let you download this deck. I think you'll download it from Canva, so it won't have the ConfQ stuff on it, but it will be available for you to pull out what you need, and those templates are available as the last 3 pages. Yeah, so I'd love to answer your questions.
Thank you, Jenna. That was an excellent session. I'm sure most of our audience would have got, the food for thought for today. And yeah, so I would like to see if there are any questions on the Q&A section.
Yeah. So meanwhile, others put the questions. I do have a question, Jenna.
Okay.
So yeah, so I think this topic was different than that of other topics. So uh, thanks for bringing this topic here, because many of time we focus on the finding defects which are objective, but you brought some of the subjective topics like a user emotions. So just I would like to understand how we should quantify this, or how we should measure this if we want to. Okay. I hope you were talking about the same, but maybe if you can give me some examples, and maybe you can quote some of the applications where you have applied this and how it was beneficial.
So measuring this is going to depend on how you measure organizationally. But I have measured by adding tags to Jira, and it actually, like, every time I test tickets, it'll have a tag that represents my, like, information from a testing session. I used exploratory testing almost exclusively at Progressive. There were other techniques I used, but more often than not, it was exploratory because of the way our teams were set up. And I started applying some of this while I was there. It was a number of years ago, so I apologize. I can't give you, like, when I was testing this specific feature. But what I did specifically when it comes to journey mapping is that I took that journey map, I recorded it every time I tested a very specific flow for the agency platform that I was working on, because the agents, and actually this is one of those templates, so the agents were giving feedback that they were unhappy with the workflow. And we kept saying, well, tell me what about the workflow you don't like. I don't understand. I need more information than just we don't like the workflow. So I started to sit down and I recorded every step. Then I took the trend data. So I said, okay, over this week, I recorded this workflow every day, or I ran this workflow every day. I didn't need to do that, but it was the only way I was going to get meaningful information, because the agents just couldn't put into words what didn't feel good. And what I realized is that it didn't feel good to the agents because it didn't follow the way a conversation with a customer would go. We made an assumption about what data they'd want first and second and third and fourth. But that assumption wasn't a conversation, it was a system of getting certain information. So what we did is we said, okay, this doesn't feel like a conversation. We need to go back to the agents and record them having a conversation. We need to record what it sounds like when they talk to a prospective customer, and then rebuild the workflow based on that. But because because the agents couldn't tell us what felt, quote, bad, and as somebody who's never sold insurance, I didn't know that it didn't feel like a conversation would. I had to make myself the human in the loop and kind of pretend to be an agent and say, well, what would it feel like to have this conversation? So the way that I've made this quantitative was I tracked it over time. And every frowny face was noted. Like, every sad face was noted, every happy face was noted. And it was noted specifically to when it happened. Because it's not individual sessions that create trend. It's, a lot of data in context that creates trend.
Just the following question. So, how do you see this human experience testing uh, with uh, with AI coming into picture? So, if I call a customer care, and if I get connected to AI, my emotions goes from green to red. So to what level we can uh, accept this, and so there are both the aspects, like how have you been using AI to leverage this, testing this, and have you been testing the applications for the user experience which has AI based components?
So I have done a little bit of testing of AI systems, but not a ton, mainly because my job kind of shifted a little bit as we've gotten into AI systems. That being said, there's another aspect of AI that's really critical here. As we roll out more AI testing, the human in the loop becomes even more critical because the AI doesn't think or feel. The AI just uses probabilistic data, right? It assumes one, but maybe it's supposed to be zero. So while we use AI to do the labor that we don't want to do, the really, I don't want to say easy stuff, but the stuff that you don't need a human for, the basic regression flows, things like that. This becomes the opportunity to correct the AI. What I mean by that is it's going to find the button on the page, even if the button doesn't really exist, because oftentimes these systems can see like the shadow DOM and stuff. So let's say the button is there somewhere on the page, but it's hiding, or it doesn't load correctly, or it's actually a link and not a button. But the AI is still going to find it. The problem is that that's not really working, right? If it's not in the right place on the page, if it's not actually a button, which matters for accessibility, it's not correct. So this human experience side balances out the loss of humanity in our software from AI automation. What I mean by that is companies that are using AI exclusively to test and don't have humans in the loop anymore, their software becomes progressively less humane. It becomes harder to use. It becomes clunkier. It doesn't feel intuitive. It doesn't feel natural. Here's the big thing about this that nobody's really talking about, but I think is going to be an issue over the next 10 years. So as we continue to roll out these AI-backed software products that are driven by AI, they might be tested by AI, heck, they may have even been coded using AI. And we think about the generational differences that are an issue now, but are going to be an even bigger issue in 10 years. We are going to have this gap where at least one generational group is going to get left out. What I mean by that is that as millennials, not all of us are millennials, but I'm a millennial. I have to get out the big computer to do like big things, right? If I'm buying a plane ticket, I'm not doing it on my phone. I'm getting out my laptop. If I'm casually shopping, I'm using my phone. But Gen Zs, Gen Alphas, they are far more mobile centric than the millennials are. Seniors as well are more mobile centric because for many of them, their first computer was their cell phone. And that may be the only computer they've ever had. Which one does AI gear towards? Which one do we build our software to work best on? Do we focus on mobile? Do we focus on desktop? Do we find a way to find a balance between the two? This kind of sentiment tracking, journey mapping is going to become really critical as we think about this growing divide in the way generational groups use computers and use software. And AI is only going to be able to help us with one of them because it can't have two minds. It can't rationalize and it can't find balance. So this kind of human experience stuff is going to get really, really, really critical as we see these groups diverge in the way they use software. And I apologize, I probably got on a tangent there, but I think it's really important because we've got this weird, interesting gap.
Yeah, thank you, Jenna.
Thank you, Jenna.
You're welcome.
We have a couple of questions in the Q&A section. I think one of the question maybe, what unique value do you think human QA engineers will continue to bring AI cannot replace?
I mean, humans bring humanity. That's really, that's what it is that it is critical that we continue to maintain humanity in our software because it's built for people. It's not built for AIs. It's not built for, robots. It's built for people. AI is never going to understand emotion or feeling or the way somebody experiences software. We can try and simulate it, but ultimately it's ones and zeros and beep boops trying to like pretend to be a person, right? So it's critical that we bring humanity back to software because it is ultimately for humans.
Thank you, Jenna. I think we have one last question here. I'm more interested to get more journey mappings. Is there any YouTube videos or live projects or any test strategy? Can this be automated? Is this applicable only to UX projects?
I really don't think you can automate journey mapping because, again, this is all central to how you feel while using something. If you'd like to learn more about journey mapping, though, I would definitely suggest, jumping into some UX research projects. There are some that you can find online. There's no like YouTube videos or anything that I know of other than maybe from like the Gallup Corporation, because I believe that Gallup actually developed journey mapping originally. But yeah, no, I don't have one. I don't think you can automate this. Like this is ultimately a human thing. And two, this is pretty new, the idea of using this in testing. So there isn't much available yet, but there's a ton out there from the UX research world that will get you started on using journey mapping beyond what we talked about today. But yeah, I apologize. I don't have like a live project for you to go play with. Maybe, in the future.
Thank you, Jenna.